Hey there everyone, it's me Lauren with APQS. I am an APQS sales representative and educator, and I want to talk to you a bit today about choosing tools for your quilt top. Today I want to talk about marking tools, friction pens, blue line marking, purple air and water soluble markers. What do I use and what can help me? So without further ado, let's check it out. Alright, so let's talk marking tools. Okay, there are so many different marking tools that we have that we can use. And sometimes it can be really difficult to know if we found the right one. We all talk a lot about different marking tools that we have, and maybe you haven't had enough information as to which ones could be really beneficial to us. This is all a very personal preference. There is no perfect or right way to do it, but I wanted to give you some tools that might allow you to feel a little more confident when you go to your machine to mark. So it can be really difficult to know which marking tool would be best, especially because a lot of them you can see on really light fabrics and a lot of them you can't see on really dark fabrics. So you kind of have to pick your poison and see what you like. I'm just going to give you some pros and cons today, and you can decide what will work best for you. Long and short of it is always test your tools on your quilt project and never use something new on a project that's important. Only use it on practice projects. All right? So Sharpies. Would I use these to mark my quilt? Absolutely. If I'm practicing, I do it all the time. They make really dark, really sharp lines, and they can be really easy for me to use. And I'm usually going to donate my practice pieces. So I use them on practice pieces all the time. But if you're not going to give your pieces away, you might not want to. Otherwise, I don't recommend using them. And then another common question that people ask me is, what about friction pens? So friction pens are actually not made for fabric, okay? They are made for paper. They are made with a chemical that when you use your iron to make it go away, because they're made to go away with heat and friction, okay? When you do that, you're actually solidifying that ink into your quilt fabric. Just like if you printed out ink off your printer and stuck an iron to it to heat set it, you are heat setting that ink into your quilt top. Those marks sometimes can come back when your quilt top is really cold if you live in a cold climate or plan on shipping it somewhere during the winter, which is no fun because you'll see every single line that you missed out on. But my point is that this is permanent. So I never use these on anything that matters. Love to use them on practice pieces because they can give you such a fine, exact line. It's a lot harder to miss where your thread and needle should hit because it doesn't give you a wide berth with the mark. It's a very exact marking tool, which I think is why a lot of people like to use these, because you have a pinpoint line, right, that you can just meet, and it's a lot easier to follow. I do not recommend using these on anything that matters, but test it with your fabrics and see how it goes. I've actually had purple pens, once I hit them with the iron, turn white. I've had pink pens turn orange. I've had red pens turn orange. I've had black pens turn white. I've had gray pens turn white. And so if I'm using a gray fabric and I use the black friction pen and then it turns white on that medium gray fabric, I now can see all of my lines. So I want you to just kind of be aware that that can happen. A lot of people ask me about Crayola washable markers. I don't know why you'd want to use washable markers. These pens that are actually made to be removed from fabric actually work, and they're not that expensive, and they last a long time if you take care of them. So I like to stick to things that are actually made for fabric, and I don't use things that are not on anything that matters. So let's talk about that for a minute. You can get a couple different size, either air and water soluble, so a purple marking pen, or water soluble blue marking pen. Blue marking pens will last on your quilt top forever. Unless you live in a mega humid climate, they might go away. The one downside that I really don't like to these pens are these caps tend to split and then your pen will dry out. So be careful not to close it too hard. You're actually going to encourage that pen to split. You can also cover that pen with a flexible electrical tape, and that'll help keep it nice and sealed as well. Okay, when I'm teaching classes, I am often teaching with my medium blue marking pen because you can really see this on the camera when we're talking. But what I will say is that it puts probably 4 times as much ink on your quilt top than anything else. So I've had people tell me I couldn't get the blue to go away. I put water on it and those just came back, and I had blue spots everywhere. So what happened was you didn't put enough water on it to get rid of the ink. So the more you draw, let's say you go over it 2 or 3 times because it takes a second for the ink to show, and then it's a really dark line. Well, now you've just tripled that marking line, the amount of ink you've put on your quilt top, and it's going to be even harder to remove later. Okay, so keep that in mind. I don't love using the medium blue marking pen unless I need it to show on camera for a quilt top, or if I know I'm not going to get to that quilt for like 2 or 3 weeks and I'm going to be working on it for a long period of time. I want these marks to stay on there and remove exactly when I want them to be removed. Worst case scenario, if the ink kind of dries and you can see it back on the top, you could spray it again or soak the entire quilt or soak the entire area so that you get enough water in that fabric to kind of dissolve the ink that's in it. Now you can see, I hope you can see, probably can't, when you use a fine line marking pen, you put on so little ink, okay, compared to the fat water soluble marking pen. The fine line ones put on like a third of the ink that you would with the medium one. So when you're talking about marking your quilt and unsure if those marks will go away with a spray of water, the less ink that you put on your actual quilt top, the easier it's going to be to remove with a spray or with a marking remove pen. Okay, you can also use the purple air and water soluble. Now the blue marker is going to last for as long as you want until you spray it off, unless you live in a super humid climate. Okay, the purple is going to dissolve in the air and with the humidity. So I'm pointing at the purple now. I hope you can see that. But that one is only going to stay on for just a minute. So in Florida, it might last 15 minutes, okay? In other areas that I've lived, it actually has lasted a lot longer than that, sometimes up to a couple of days. But it just depends on how dry the climate is that you're working in. I also love these. They remind me of my kids' Aquadoodle. I don't even know if they still make Aquadoodles, but it's basically a felt tip marker. Ooh, I just got Sharpie on it. It's basically like a felt tip, and you fill this tube with water. You can open it up and fill it up, and then it releases water onto your quilt top. So if I wanted to remove these marks, I just kind of have to paint them right on my quilt top till I see the water fill them all up, okay? And then they're just gonna magically dissolve and go away. This thing is fantastic. This specific one is made by the Filtech company, but you can get these through many different manufacturers. You could probably Google Aquadoodle pen and it'll come up and you'll be able to use that. I love this when I'm working on my machine because it allows me to quickly remove marks that I no longer want to see when I want to see my pretty quilt top. Okay, so I do love the blue water soluble and the purple air and water soluble, and I have had problems getting them out, but I've troubleshooted what those problems are, and generally the right amount of water does the trick. So as long as your quilt isn't going to bleed and you can spray it a little bit more or use that water pen to go ahead and get the markings off, these are the ones that are made for fabrics, and these are the ones that I would use. Okay, you can even get a blue marking pen that's kind of in between the fine line and the other one. This is actually my favorite because it doesn't have a felt tip, it has a rubber tip, so it doesn't flat and smush and get fatter as you use it like the traditional old style felt tips do. Okay, so those are some things that you want to consider when you're looking into specific marking pens. And we all have favorite things that we use on white and light fabrics. Okay, I've even got like a sew line, whoops, like blue chalk pencil. You can erase, rub, or wash off. I don't love any kind of colored chalk. The reason being is because this is a fiber, quilts are made with fabric, it's fibrous, right? As you use this little wheel that rolls around to get the chalk out, that little wheel splits your fibers and nestles that chalk right in between there, and you'd be shocked at how difficult it is to get yellow chalk out of a white quilt top. I learned that the hard way. I almost had a heart attack because I used it on a customer quilt, and I was so worried I wasn't going to be able to get it out. So I only use white chalks if I can, because they're not going to dye or change my fabric. And again, if you've got, you know, yellow or colored chalks that you want to use on various fabrics, you sure can. Just make sure that you have a means to remove them, because they oftentimes don't want to come out. Sometimes lint brushes can be helpful. Again, sometimes you can wash, but I'm generally not trying to wash my quilts before I take them or give them back to my clients. There are various chalk pencils that you can use. Okay, these ones are called Joann's. They're in silver and in white. You can tell I did not even sharpen my silver. I'm not going to use it. After I used my white ones, I actually thought they were going to be amazing because they were white on a dark orange fabric, and it didn't matter what I did, it wasn't coming out. I had to use a sponge with a hard scrubby back to scrub this out of the fibers, because the way that it was supposed to go away, it didn't. And so I spent hours and hours trying to scrub it out without making my quilt look like I just scrubbed it for hours. Okay, so just be careful with chalk pencils. If you sharpen them and the chalk easily decays, that means it has less wax in it, so it's more likely to come out of your quilt top. If you sharpen the chalk pencil and the tip stays sharp for a long time, that means that it has a lot of wax in it. And this particular one, I don't know how well you can tell, but it actually has a lot of wax, and that's why it's so difficult to get out of my fabric after the fact. So be sure that you test your materials before you find yourself trying to rub your chalk pencil out of your quilt top for hours. Okay, and then last but not least, I actually like this little doohickey here. So when you're using those full line stencils, you've got the full line stencil pencil, right? You can kind of use it to complete what your design should look like, so that if your chalk missed any of the lines, it can kind of connect the dots and work that way. It is made with a lot of wax. I literally was able, I broke off the tip and I melted it and I put it back together. So it's made with a lot of wax in that chalk, but it's actually made to go away with heat. So it is an iron-off pen made by Full Line Stencil, Hansi manufacturing company, and you can actually use that and iron it off. What I will say is that when I used this pencil and I ironed my fabrics, and I only made little tiny lines to mark where my ruler was going to stitch certain things, those little marks showed up as shiny, chalky lines, and that really bothered me. So again, test all your products. This is something that I like to use, but only on white fabrics or light fabrics, because you're less likely to see a waxy, chalky residue on something like that after you iron it. Okay, so everything's going to kind of have its place. Just make sure that you test your marking pens on your different materials to see if you're going to have any issues with them not being removable or getting worse and kind of bleeding out into the rest of your quilt top. Okay, but like I said, tried and true, I've had many issues with the blue and purple and water soluble, but since I've learned how to use them, I have a lot less issues. Okay, and the biggest takeaway, honestly, is that you want to use less ink. All right, so this is a media, this is like a fat pencil. This one is like a medium, and it's got that rubber tip, so it's not going to get any fatter. And this one is a fine line, and this one is a fine line, just so you can see the difference between all of the different blue and purple marking pens. So the less ink you put on your quilt top, the easier it is to remove, either with the water removing pen, right, or by using a spray bottle of some kind to get those marks to go away. All right, so I am a little bit biased. I do prefer to use those marks, those marking pens. I have had, like I said, issues with them in the past, but I've been able to resolve all of them amenably. I didn't have to sit there and scrub things for hours or do more than just getting my quilt a little bit more wet to let more water dissolve all of the ink that I've put on my quilt top. If you guys have any questions about any of these marking pens, don't forget to put a comment below this video so that we can help answer those questions for you. These particular marking pens that I have, I want to say are all by Dritz. and I like them that way. I've been using Dritz for a while, and I have no issues for them, and I like them. I want to say this blue one is Clover, and these two are Dritz. And these were previously the same ones that Collins Company used, but now Dritz uses them and Collins doesn't manufacture them anymore. Alright, so most of us when we piece quilts, we don't just use one type of fabric. We use different kinds of fabrics, and I noticed that I have a bunch of grunge here, so it is one kind of fabric. But the point that I'm making is that we use all different kinds of fabrics when we're piecing. Every fabric manufacturer uses uses a different kind of sizing or finishing chemical to finish up their fabrics before they get them all loaded up and ready to go, so that it makes it easier for you to cut. And so many people wash their fabrics, but many people don't wash their fabrics. And if you don't take into account the different chemicals that could be on your different kinds of fabric, your marking tools, okay, might interact with your quilt top different ways with your red fabric than with your black fabric than with your brown fabric, because I didn't pre-wash my fabrics, right? And so it's going to interact with them all differently chemically, because these are all chemicals that you're putting on your quilt top. So it might be a little bit harder to remove one from one color than from another color. Okay, so when in doubt, I usually try to go like along where my selvage would be, and I'll take my pen and I'll give it a little color. Okay, I'll make a big fat square rectangle dot, whatever I can make. Okay, then since this is a friction pen, I'll use an iron and I'll iron it, and I'll see if that turns white or if it goes away or if I'm gonna have any issues with it. And that's because a lot of times friction pens can turn a specific color as opposed to disappearing, because they're not made to turn invisible. They're made to turn white or as light as white as they can, because they're made to work with paper and not with colored fabrics. So I'm gonna test this on all of my fabrics to make sure that I'm able to make those marks go away. If you have scrap fabrics that you can test it on, even better, so you don't mark on weird portions of your quilt top. All right, and I'm going to do the same thing whether it is a blue water-soluble marking pen. Okay, I'm going to do that in my selvage, and then I'm going to practice making it go away and see how it reacts with all of the different sizing and whatnot in my fabrics. All right, same thing is going to go for if you want to use Crayola washable markers. How are those going to interact with the different fabrics once you spritz them with water? Okay, how are they going to bleed? Are the reds pre-washed? Can I spritz my red and it won't dye into my cream or my white or anything else that it might be touching? And so you may not be able to use water-soluble marking tools. In that case, you might need to use marking tools that are the chalk, right? And when in doubt, I like to use white chalk because it's not going to accidentally get stuck in anything and maybe never come out like a yellow or a blue chalk would. Okay, so you may want to use a chalk instead if you've got lighter fabrics that you don't think will bleed. Using the water soluble is fine because you can use water to make them go away. And when in doubt, if you plan on washing your whole quilt when you're done, fantastic. Use the water soluble, and once you take it out of the washing machine, make sure all the marks are gone, then you can pop it in the dryer. If all the marks aren't gone by the time it comes out of the washing machine, which is highly unlikely, you can always throw it in the wash for another rinse and spin and see if that does the trick for you too. All right, so let's make sure that we're taking into account the different chemicals that could be on our particular fabrics, and that we are testing out all of our materials before we begin with the preferred removal method that is indicated by the actual supplier. Okay, that's really important. And if it doesn't work, practice it on your scraps so that you don't get really mad and want to pull your hair out because you did it on a project that matters and now you can't get the colors to come out. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Again, I'm Lauren Jackson with APQS, and we were talking about selecting the proper marking tools for your quilt top. I hope that this video today was helpful for you and that this information helps you kind of understand maybe some faux pas that you might have had in the past and how to better get those markings out of your quilt top. If you like this video, please be sure to take a moment, give it a thumbs up, click the like and subscribe button to the YouTube channel so that you can be made aware of these new videos as they continue to come out.